That to me is like perhaps the greatest failing of education. That lots of people, regardless of the circumstances, who go through that period of life and not connect with their sense of purpose. To not connect with a first-hand knowledge that they can get engaged with things they really care about and they can make a difference. In fact, to have no rite of passage. Because to me, the rite of passage into young adulthood is all about this. Regardless of what word you use, the word leadership is just a word that's in the program, so I'm using it and explaining to you a little bit why. It is about becoming who I might become as a member of a larger community. Aware that I can actually make a difference in that community. So we thought we would use that time period for each of us, regardless of our chronological age right now, to also kind of reflect at this time of my life, what was going on with me? Or if I'm in that time of my life now, what is going on with me? And what are some of the choices that I have made to bring myself to this point of awareness? We'll come back to that in a second. So I just want to make one other general comment about leadership. When are you? It's kind of a trick question. When are you a leader? Now, I already said I'm not talking about leadership as being a boss. But leadership the way I was defining it before. That courage, that conviction, that capacity to step ahead. It's kind of a trick question, because the point I want to make is very simple. If you're serious about this domain, you'll be at it forever. There's a wonderful saying in the traditional Confucian tradition in China. To become a leader, you must first become a human being. To become a leader, you must first become a human being. And that takes your lifetime. Leadership is by its nature, the more you understand it, a deeply developmental subject. It's about our journey as human beings. It's about our continual learning. It's about our next challenge. It's about doing something that's really difficult for me now and stepping into that difficulty. It's never over. You're never there. There's no there. That's why when we went around that circle with those young people, former gang members, they all had almost no interest in talking about leader or leadership. They had some wonderful comments, but it wasn't part of their way of thinking because they don't think of themselves as being in that kind of state. They do think very much about what they're trying to accomplish and their continual growth and development as human beings. They're very, very good at that. So leadership is, by its nature, a developmental subject. It becomes a kind of window or a lens for us to look at our growth and development as human beings. A subject which I assume is very much in resonant, or a resonant one, in a Jesuit university. Right? How we grow and develop as human beings. In our ability particularly to contribute to the health of the wholes that matter for us. So I know that may be a bit of a long statement, but that's kind of the essence of what we're here to explore. How I grow and develop as a human being in order to be able to contribute to the health and well-being of the wholes about which I care. My family, my community, my society, my organization, whatever the larger system or whole that draws my attention. Just like that young person said, I don't know what it means to be a leader. I'm just trying to do the best I can for the health of the whole. Okay? So, now, what I would like to do in just a minute is give you a few minutes to reflect on whatever this means to you. I'm going to ask a couple of more specific questions. I'm also going to invite you to do something which will make this room a little more workable for us. It's perfectly fine to move your chairs around a little, because in a minute I'm going to ask you to be in a conversation with at least one other person. This could be done with 2 people, it could be done with 3, but I would recommend 2 is perfect. I would recommend you do this with someone you don't know. Now, oftentimes when we come into a room like this, we sit next to people we know. So that'll give you an opportunity to get up and stretch, and move around, and find somebody else. And you'll see why once we get into this. It's actually very much, it's easier, and in many ways it's more interesting to do this with someone you don't know. You can also have this conversation later with some of your friends or colleagues when you might be here. Okay, so that's what I'd like to do in just a minute. Here's the question. I'm going to ask the same question about 4 different ways, because there's no one perfect set of words. How did I get here? How did I get here? What led me to this point, in this place, in this moment? If you just make one little assumption that everybody is here in this room at this time because of the choice. It could be a small choice, but it's going to come, 5 o'clock. It's still a choice. And oh, by the way, we start a little bit late. We will end around 7. We won't run very much over, as I'm sure some of you have plans, because originally the plan was to go from 5 to 7. And what we'll do there is we'll have a little pause, let those who need to leave, and then we'll stay and convene a smaller conversation just to go deeper for another 45 minutes or an hour, however long we will stay. So that's kind of the time schedule. So you made a choice to come. You may or may not have thought much about that. But it's even more than that. So when I said, how did you get here? I don't just mean in this room. At this point in your life, what are some of the really, as you look at it, critical choices you have made to get you to this point? Again, I'm asking the same question several different ways. Whatever form of it kind of resonates for you, just grab that one. How did I get here? What's the choice that led me to come this afternoon? But more than that, what are some of the key choices that led me to this point in my life? Remember when I said leadership is like art? It only exists in the present. So we can reflect on what are some things we're aware of that brought us here. And in that moment of reflection, it changes. Sort of like history. History is not facts. History is a story. It's told in the moment. And in that moment, sometimes the facts actually look a little different. So some of you may find, if you reflect on how did I get here, what are some choices I made that are really important to me at this point in my life, you'll see some things a little different about some of those choices. You'll tell a bit of a news story. Because I'd really like to invite you, and this is my last comment, to set up the practice. Tell a story that supports you. Tell a story that maybe helps you see a little more clearly things that matter to you. Yes, we make choices, but the real point of that choice is the choice is an action that connects something that matters to us to something we will do. It's in an interface between something that's very interior, something that matters to me, and something that's very exterior, my behavior, what I do. So as you tell the story to your colleague in the conversation, tell a story that will help you see something. It will illuminate something for you. Don't worry about thinking too hard. It was not easy to figure that out. All I had to do was look around the room and all the smiles and the laughter. I'm going to ask a couple of very general questions. First off, how many of you as a listener, not as a speaker, when you were listening, found that you were really engaged in what the other person had to say? Just like you were drawn into it. Okay? Now obviously it's all different, and we have very different particular things that people are talking about. But to the extent that was true, just notice there's something subtle going on here. There's people who are not trying to tell you something you'd be interested in. They were reflecting on and talking about their own journeys. How many of you heard something from one of the others you were speaking with that you could really identify with yourself? That's pretty neat. Let's just look at all the hands went up. Again, I did not ask you to tell the other person about something that they would be interested in, did I? This is a very important kind of such a basic fact. I don't know what word to use. Like a simple truism that when we're honest and when we're just communicating what's real for us, when we're authentic and honest, we connect. If that wasn't the case, there would be no such thing as shared visions. Another idea, another image or phrase that you often see associated with leadership is people building shared visions. Now, there's a lot involved in doing that. Well, in a complicated situation, it's really a complicated process. But it's important to understand the essence. Why is this even possible? It's possible because if I really reflect on what matters to me, and I'm in a conversation where I can be honest about that, non-manipulative. You weren't trying to get the other person to do anything, right? You were just sharing with them how I got here. We meet each other. We find each other. There's a wonderful phrase that the American psychologist Carl Rogers said long, long ago. He said, that which is most personal is most universal. That which is most personal is most universal. If that were not the case, we would live in a very different world. The possibilities of people really working together ever on things they really care about, personally and collectively, would just not be the same. But it's that kind of awareness that people who are good as leaders kind of operate from. One last thing. Now, I don't know, you all had the conversations you had, so I can't say this for each of you, but just looking around the room and getting a little sense of the energy and the engagement, you were just being yourself. Right? I mean, this is such a simple statement. And it might not have always been true. There might have been sometimes where you were really trying to make a certain impression, or you were really worried about what the other person would think about you. Those are very natural states to get into. But by and large, my guess is most of you were just being yourself. How many of you have ever heard the word charismatic? Charismatic, right? It's another one of those words that's often associated with leadership. And if you hear someone say, oh, well, that person's very charismatic, what does it usually mean? Say that person's very charismatic.
Easygoing.
Easygoing? Pardon? Has a charm. Interesting person, draws attention, usually a good speaker, kind of makes a very strong impression.
Makes you laugh.
Oh, maybe it makes you laugh. It's interesting. I don't think I would hear that in the United States. Usually people talk about it's nice to hear. Easy to deal with. So that's very interesting. When I asked this question, most recently, it was a group of students at MIT. And probably about, well, maybe it's because they were at MIT. I don't know. But nobody said makes you laugh. And nobody said easy to deal with. But they said things like impressive. You know, someone who stands out. So I shouldn't have to tell you this, because I think almost everybody in this room is associated in some way or other with a Jesuit university. But the word charismatic comes from the noun charisms. Let me just ask, how many people in this room know what your charisms are? Is It's a church term. It comes from the Catholic Church. Your charisms are your gifts. To be charismatic is to be in touch with your gifts. That's literally what the word means. To be yourself as fully as you're able right now. To be in touch with your own gifts is to be charismatic. And it's interesting, the consequences are, you may, be easy to get along with, you may be funny, people tend to stand out, but those are all consequences. It's actually not what it means. So that's the last thing I just want you to kind of reflect on from that first conversation. To the extent you were just yourself. It's a simple thing to say, it's not always so simple to do. Okay? Social pressures are social pressures. We all are very aware of them. Whether it's a boss, or a peer, or another student, or a parent, or whomever we're around, we are mindful of how the other sees us. To the extent that actually blocks us being ourselves, we block our charisms. So, what I'd like to do is kind of move into the second part of what we planned. I'd like to invite in a minute Claudia and Mariana to come up and share a little bit of their story. Again, it's really nice to have two people who were undergraduate students here at your university. I wasn't, so this is the first time I've ever been here. So, and they can kind of speak a little bit from the standpoint of someone who's lived in this place. But in both cases, they're just going to reflect a little bit on why it mattered to them to be in an environment and how that played out for them, to kind of connect with what mattered to them, activate their own leadership potential. Okay? How do you just start?
Buenas tardes a todos. Me siento un poco extraña que tengo que hablar inglés, pero como dijeron que iba a ser en inglés la conferencia, pues les pido una disculpa de tener que hablar en inglés a mis colegas mexicanos solo por... That's quite a thing, that we all speak Spanish and just for you, we're speaking English. At these levels here, but we'll go with it. So, I want to start by thanking this university because as we were planning, I have to tell you, I didn't want to speak. It wasn't my plan. I didn't set it up for me to be in stage. But Peter invited me to share the story of me as a leader, and I thought that maybe it would be useful. But I feel a little bit humbled, to be honest. So when he invited me to reflect, the first thing I became aware of was that this university was the first place where I experienced my own leadership. I was in communications long time ago, I was the first generation to come into this campus. And it was through someone who was a leader when I was a student, Ramon Zorrilla, who passed away and we were students, so he had an immense impact in who I am today. That took me in the hand and said, you have to make a difference. And the real lesson in being a student here is not about what happens inside the school, it's about how we connect to the world outside. And he kind of pushed me into that threshold. It's not that I wanted to make the walk, it was I was pushing to it. So that's another possibility that you get pushed into leadership. That was my case. He said, no option, you gotta do it. So I organized the first la Semana de la Comunicación in 1990 something. ¿Cómo? 1990. Around. And the incredible thing that was that, of course, I was not thinking about myself as a leader, but that this place gave me maybe the three elements that brought me to be the person I am today, from which I'm very grateful. San Ignacio de Loyola to begin with. So just just briefly, because I want to take Peter's time, the question was, what brought you to be here as a leader? And I grew up in a family of educators. Everybody was an educator in my family. So I just used to play a la escuelita all the time. But there was something that became clear when I was like 8 years old, was that I was not going to do a classroom, and like I was not going to be a teacher, and I was not going to be a principal, because that was going to take way too long, because we needed to change the world. And one school at the time was not very efficient. So in that moment, I thought it was going to be through media. And when I went to the moment of choosing a career, there was like pedagogy, which I thought was very boring, all the materias. And then I had another kind of little thing to say, which I went to 11 schools in my trajectory as a student, which kind of said something about I didn't really fit into the system.
Between what ages?
Between the starting point of being going to school
Like five.
Like 5, or yeah, 5 when you start going to school. So 11 schools